Karl Monger is a licensed professional counselor, certified rehabilitation counselor, national certified counselor. He founded the veteran serving nonprofit GallantFew in 2010, an organization that provides connecting, coaching, and counseling to veterans. Karl served as an infantry officer in the 9th and 25th Infantry Divisions and the 1st Ranger Battalion. He is a Desert Storm veteran, holds the rank of Major in the U.S. Army Retired Reserves. He has been a Rotarian since 2003. He's a member of the Trophy Club Rotary Club. He's married with 2 daughters, a grandson, and last but not least, 2 dogs.
I'm going to tell you about my great uncle Roy, who's my grandmother's brother. And I've got some show and tell stuff over here. So if I get talking too much, don't let me forget to do the show and tell part, because that's pretty important. And I'm managing multiple screens here, so I want to make sure I get this right. So my great uncle Roy is the tall one in the very back. My grandmother is Juanita right there, and that's her brother Roy. Pretty large family. I love my great grandfather's mustache, and because he grew that mustache, I can't. So he must have used up all the mustache genes. So my great uncle Roy and I had a connection early on because we were both born on June 1st. So I really didn't understand who he was or what he had done, except he was my grandmother's older brother who ran a ranch for a rich guy in rural Kansas. And every once in a while we'd go out and I'd get to see him. And it was super boring because he had stacks of cowboy magazines and he just wanted to go outside all the time. And, you know, being a kid, that wasn't super exciting for me because Kansas, it's kind of like Texas here, 100 degrees, you don't want to go outside very much. But when I went in the Army, I really got an understanding of what World War I was about. I mean, when I was in high school, the history lessons just weren't maybe detailed enough to really give me a true appreciation for it. But so now I'm in the Army and I'm studying battles. And I remember that my great uncle Roy was a World War I. And so I go home on leave, and this was when I was in the 1st Ranger Battalion. I go home on leave, and I think it's like the 4th of July, and Uncle Roy and I are sitting by ourselves on the back porch of my grandmother's house. Everybody else had gone. We had these big family get-togethers, but everybody else had left, and he and I are sitting there alone. And he decides to just start opening up and telling me stories about World War I. And it was amazing to hear him tell me these stories, but I still didn't really understand. The next day, before I left and went back to the Army, I was helping my grandmother with some things in the kitchen. And I said, Uncle Roy, yesterday he told me about that time that he was stuck in the shell hole and he had to count seconds between the rounds coming in so he could go drag his body into the shell hole. And my grandmother was like, what? And it turns out that he had not shared anything of the details of the service with anybody else in the family. But now that I come back, I was an infantryman and he was an infantryman, he felt like he could open up and he could share things. And so that became the beginning of us really being closer than we were before. When he passed away, my grandmother gave me his dog tag. And this is the compass that he carried when he was a squad leader in France. This is the compass I carried when I was in the Army. So you can kind of compare the two together. And I also have his canteen cup, which on the bottom says U.S. 1918. And when I was in the 1st Ranger Battalion, I parachuted with this cup into Kuwait at the end of the storm. They were the exact same design, just made it different. That one's steel, the modern ones were aluminum. And now they don't use canteens because they were backpack leather. And this was his lunch kit. And you can see on the top where he's scratched his name, etched his name into the top and his service number, which is the same one that's on the dog tag. He lived almost to be 100. Ancestry.com is really cool. So I was able to find his draft card. on Ancestry.com. So that's his signature, Wichita, Kansas, June 5th, 1917, not too long after his birthday. And I started learning some things about the Meuse-Argonne campaign. 47 days long. 1.2 million American soldiers were in the campaign. And you see the cost there, 28,000 Germans, 26,000 Americans gave their lives. It was the deadliest battle in American history. This is at the Meuse-Argonne. There is a diorama, not sure if that's what we call it, but there's a diagram up on the wall, and it shows the unit positions. And he was in the 89th Division, where that yellow arrow is pointing down. When I left the Army and came back to Wichita, I signed up for the Army Reserves, and I served for a few more years in the Army Reserves before I got completely out. And I served in the 89th Division. So we both ended up serving in the same unit. Although I did more come out with the Reserve Headquarters Command, not an infantry division, but we wore the same patch, which was a lot of fun. Of the things that I inherited when he passed away was a book that was the G Company 353rd Infantry 89th Division history. And it had a bunch of photographs in it and some first-person accounts. I donated that book to the Meuse-Argonne Cemetery, the National Cemetery there. I don't know if it'll ever go on display or not, but they got it. So I didn't want it to just disappear, in another however many years after I'm gone. I wanted to make sure it went to where it might be appreciated. This was his unit. Now, it's a little hard to see here, but this is him before he went, and this is him after he got back. It kind of looks maybe a little scared in the top and a little cockier in the bottom. Of course, he came out as a corporal. In that book, it had pictures. This is the Sergeant Major of Lieutenant Bowers or Balbers Company, and he's teaching them bayonet. And if you want to afterwards, you can come up and take a closer look at my computer, because when you look at the detail of that photo, it's just everything about the clothes, the weapon, all of that stuff is really cool to be able to see. And when you think about the gear that they carried, the equipment they had compared to what we have now, it's a completely different plane of existence, right? In that book, the hellish shell finding the shallow pit of an unfortunate doughboy, and he died in the grave his own hands. I thought it was really telling that an old man had, with a shaky pen, underlined that line, because that's something that he had to have carried with him his entire life. This is a topographical map. In the material that I inherited were pulled out maps that showed the battle positions of the companies. And since I was in the Army, I kind of know how to read a topographical map. So my wife and I decided that we would take a little trip. Now, this is November of 1918. His unit here is Company G. And in France, these positions correlate to this little hilltop right here. And so I did a little map reconnaissance. My wife and I went to France. We've both been there several times. We've never been to this area. So we decided we were going to go find it. First thing we needed to do is we needed to find Tailly, T-A-I-L-L-Y. So we get there, and there is no Tailly, France on any map anywhere. And so I started asking people, where is Tailly, France? And they looked at me like, Tailly, France? What are you talking about? Finally, somebody goes, what do you mean Tailly? Okay, where's Tailly? And they're like, well, it's just right over there. So we were really close to it. It's just that the pronunciation was completely different. So we parked our rental car and we walked up this road. And of course, I'm looking at the ground because I just know I'm going to find a shelter. Find one. But the wood line up here, this little gap right here was where we were going, because that was what was identified on the map that I had as being one of the places that his company was. This is walking into that wood line. And when we got into the wood line, I found a trench. So the trench now is kind of filled in because it's been 100 years, right, since it was done. But the trench that I'm standing in is right at the base of where the hill goes up higher. And it goes all the way around this hill. And so I suppose it's possible that it could have changed hands several times, but I know for a fact that's from my uncle. So it's kind of cool to stand in the same trench that he fought from back in 1918. So we took that canteen cup of his. We had bought a bottle of French wine when we were in town, and we did a toast to the soldiers that were there, had a little drink ourselves, and poured it out on the ground. And that's the village, that's Tailly down there, that little village it overlooks. And see, it's Tailly, it's Tailly. But this is the actual little town. And I found in his yearbook, I found a picture of the town as it existed back in World War I. And the buildings don't exactly line up, but I think it's pretty close to the same area. This is the bridge over the Moose, and that's the bridge that they originally built when the Americans took over. So I know that's the exact same spot. So they were able to improve it a little bit. 70 kilometers, 70 miles per hour, and you're leaving the neck. It's weird the way that they mark the signs. It takes a little bit of getting used to the way the signs are. And they want to make sure you know it's a river. So the second place that we went to was the Transvaal Farm. And in the book, it talked about this was one of the first aerial bombardments from an aerial attack by aircraft on ground troops. And a German biplane flew over and dropped a grenade on the mess tent, and it filled the mess tent. And it happened right here at this farm. And so we went again. I've got the battle positions where they had moved to. So we went and located exactly on the ground where they were. And the farm, there were still some buildings out there, but it really didn't look like that. But I got a picture holding his dog tags while we were there. After that, we went to see the Lost Battalion. Anybody heard of the Lost Battalion? You know the story of the Lost Battalion? This unit here, the 308th Infantry Regiment, during the Meuse-Argonne campaign, this company was sent forward in an attack, and they had French troops on the right, and I don't remember who was on the left. But as they were told, you must attack, you must go forward. They're the only ones that did. So everybody else ended up falling back. The Lost Battalion stayed forward. The Lost Battalion became completely surrounded by Germans. For about 3 weeks, they're completely surrounded by Germans. And I first heard about this at Fort Moore, which used to be called Fort Benning. There's Whittlesey Boulevard. And I had no idea who Whittlesey was. As I started doing my work with veterans, and I got to come back and tell you how as I started doing work with veterans, I started learning about veteran suicide. And I started doing some historical research on veteran suicide. Major Whittlesey, after the battle, received a Medal of Honor. After the war, he became an attorney in New York. He had been an attorney before and then joined to go fight, and then came back and took pick up his law practice. When the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers was dedicated, he was one of the VIPs that went and stood there while they dedicated the Tomb of the Unknowns. After that, he went back to his apartment in New York, paid all his bills forward, put all his affairs in order, booked a troop ship to Cuba because he was going to go on vacation, and never got to Cuba. Somewhere along the way, he jumped over. And he wasn't able to deal with everything that they had been through. So we decided we wanted to go see where he was. And this was only a few kilometers away from Minneapolis. There's a very famous pigeon. And this one-eyed, one-legged pigeon was a carrier pigeon that they didn't use. At one point during the battle, and this is Whittlesey during the war, and this is Whittlesey after, with the Medal of Honor on the Americans started not knowing that they were where they were. The Americans started dropping shells on their own troops. And so they sent this bird with a note that said, "For God's sake, stop shelling." And that one-legged, one-eyed pigeon made it with the message we got them to stop shooting. So the bird now is memorialized at the base of the hill where the battle took place. This is, it's hard to get an appreciation of the steepness of this slope. In a minute, I'm going to show you the Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery, where I met a retired master sergeant that runs the cemetery there. But he told us about this, and he said, when you go, be super careful because it's rained recently, and when there's rain, the hill, the dirt and the mud moves around a little bit, and it may uncover a shell. And if it uncovers a shell, do not touch it because there's mustard gas out there. And if you accidentally hit it, it could release some of that gas. So this hill is like, the angle is like this. It's not possible. You can't walk up the hill, and it's so steep. We had to go side to side to side to be able to go up. And that's my wife up above me there. That is where they had their Medicaid station. That's where they treated all the soldiers that were wounded down in this little depression.
They called it Mayday Trench.
I'm sorry?
They called it the Mayday Trench.
I'm not familiar with that.
What did you just call that?
That was where they treated the medics. The medics treated all the soldiers. And the guy at the cemetery had told me the last time he was there, someone had hung an American flag at the bottom of the command post. And he said, if it's still there, that's where the command post was. And the American flag was still hanging there. This is down at the very bottom of the base of the hill. I thought I had another picture in there. I'm not seeing it. Well, let's go on to the Meuse-Argonne Cemetery. So the Meuse-Argonne National Cemetery, anybody, I know you probably got that. Have you ever been to an American cemetery overseas? Oh, if you ever travel, you gotta go see an overseas American cemetery. Because it's American soil. It is cared for by Americans. And absolutely phenomenal to see. Inside, there's a small house that's about the size of this room that the American cemeteries over there recreated an American living room. And it had rooms in the back for families to stay. And they encouraged, because most of the men that were buried here, they couldn't exhume their bodies and take them home. So their family members would come over, they would get to stay in this room, they would have a little living space that kind of reminded them of home before they went out to visit their loved ones who were buried there. This is the master sergeant that is retired, and he was the caretaker of the cemetery. So he basically was in charge of the whole thing. And he lived in a small house right behind this this little building.
How was that funded?
It's tax-driven. The American Battlefield. Inside the mausoleum, there are all of the units memorialized in stained glass, and this is the 89th Division. They call it the Rolling W. This is the edge of the cemetery. All the trees are absolutely perfectly cared for, perfectly pruned. There's not a blade of grass out of place in the entire thing. And I can't remember right now what those trees are. So remember the master sergeant, I said the master sergeant that was killed? So we found his, and we were able to remember him for my uncle Roy while we were there. Roy E. Wright. We also visited a Medal of Honor recipient. When we were inside of the mausoleum area, they had displays of notable soldiers and some of the stories about them. And so we looked up this captain that was a Medal of Honor recipient when we were there. Then we decided we would go see the Verdun battlefield. Anybody been to Verdun? Verdun is absolutely stunning. It's, I think, the site of the largest battle on European soil. 300,000 killed. There are 1,200 square kilometers that they have blocked off that they won't let anybody go into because there's so much unexploded ordnance and gas shells in there that they're afraid for people's safety. But because of that, there are a ton of men who are also that they're never going to go in and pull out. So it's just the whole area is blocked off, kind of like a national park where you can't go into. All those bumps in the ground, those are old shovels. 80,000 remains still lay out there. Again, looks like top of a golf ball. Those are all shovels. And this is 100 years. Imagine what that must have looked like after the battle. The ossuary contains 146,142 soldiers' bones. And I took a picture and then I deleted it later. But when you look around, when you walk around the back, you can look underneath. They have kind of an open area that's glassed in. That if you look under, it's almost like a crawl space under a house. It looks like that. It's the size you can see all underground in this thing. Machine gun. Yeah.
Can you get inside of them?
I did not try. And I'm not sure why it's doing that. I might need your help here. It's going crazy on me.
Yeah, just on the bottom of the, not there. On the bottom of the picture part of it, further. See that bottom square down there on the bottom right? Like that. There you go.
All right. So I think did it skip one? Let's see. Nope. So some of the things that were invented during or right around the World War I time, I thought it was real interesting. All the X-rays, all the inventions there. Of course, tanks were, gas masks, sanitary napkins, flamethrowers, tracers, air-to-ground communication. The first time anybody had ever communicated with an aircraft from the ground was in World War I. And that's a picture taken during the Ozark campaign. I have no idea who the soldiers are, just to give you an idea of what that must have looked like. I can't even imagine what it would have felt like to experience that in person. And that's kind of what it looks like now. It's just rolling, gorgeous, beautiful hills. And this is just taken about a half mile away from the battle position where I found my uncle's trench. Everywhere you go there, they remember the Moose-Argonne campaign in 1918. You see lots of signs there. And again, that's my Uncle Roy. And his compass and dog tags that I'm passing around. And in that book that I have, it's kind of like a little yearbook thing, I love some of the quotes that the soldiers have written that they've kept. I like the water was not made to drink, war can't faze me, I'm married. Dadgummit, by gum, oh my side, by golly. You know, all the old type language that they had out there. And then when you read some of the jokes, they're a little off color if you read some of the in between the lines there.
That was their version of texting?
I think so, yeah. They just collected a bunch of quotes from them. So after my Uncle Roy died, and I got his compass, I had, this was pre 9/11. And I had not been involved in the veteran community, as a veteran, because the major event that happened a year before I left active duty was a helicopter crash that killed 12 of my friends. I worked in South's name on my wrist now, U.S. Lifetime Commander. And there were 5 Rangers and 8 Air Force Special Operations guys who were on the helicopter. And because of that, it was so painful that I decided to follow some of the military. And I was senior captain in the first Ranger. It'd be like being a starting player for the Cowboys and deciding you just don't want to be on the Cowboys anymore, and then the next year they go on to the Super Bowl and you're not there. Maybe that'll happen someday for the Cowboys, I don't know. But I've taken myself off of that team. And so I didn't feel like I belonged at veteran reunions. I didn't join the VFW American Legion. I didn't do that stuff. And I didn't like it when people asked me what I did in the military. Because if I knew somebody from music college, they said, hey, I remember you went in the Army. Why are you out? How'd that do? If I had to tell them I was a Ranger, that would bring up the helicopter crash and bring up all that stuff, and then I might end up drinking, and it just, I avoided it. I didn't want to even have the conversation. So then 9/11 happened. And my boss, who I remember the day that I walked into his office and said, Joe, I'm getting out of the Army. I decided to make my family a higher priority than the military. Now he is a full colonel and he is commanding all the Rangers, Ranger Regimental Commander. And he and several of my very good friends parachuted into Afghanistan in October of 2001. Very first American unit to go large scale. They established what ultimately became the airfield forward operating base, and all the rest of the Afghan stuff came in out. When I saw in the news that he was there, I was inactive Army Reserve and had access to the email. And so I decided to send an email and say I was proud and jealous and wish I could be there. And I asked him to pass it on the thanks of a grateful nation to everyone that was with me. And 2 days later, he emailed me back from Afghanistan. And as we reconnected, he invited me in July 2003 to go back to then Fort Benning to his change command. And Ranger change command, any military unit change command, pomp and circumstance parade, there's bands, it is a big deal. And when the Rangers do it, Rangers from all eras come back. When I was on active duty, I got to know Len Lamont, who was one of the Rangers that climbed Point de Hawk. He found the guns that were a mile behind lines and put charges on, moving up all 100. Germans are standing about a football field away from them. I got to be friends with these guys while they were still alive. So I know all these Rangers are coming back, and I'm like, oh, Joe's invited me to go to this, but he's my friend, and he led this response in Afghanistan. I have to go. And so as I walk up to the back of the bleachers, there's a young Ranger standing there with a clipboard. He sees me coming, and he says, "Sir, what's your name?" And I said, "Son, I'm not on your list. I'm just going to go stand in here, take some pictures, and I'll be out." And he said, "Sir, tell me your name." And so I told him my name, and he looked at his clipboard and said, "Oh, you're on the list. Call me." And Joe had saved a seat, front row, center mass, with all of the VIP dignitaries, and my name plastered on that. And in that minute, he said, "I'm still part of this team, and he still values me, and I quit." It was amazing to be walking back there. But that allowed me to have the emotional authority to talk to the men. Now there's women there, but then it was only men that I had known from 10 years previously when I. And during that 10 years, I had never gone and sought mental health. I had used alcohol as a way to medicate. I was at the tail end of going through divorce. I had gone through half a dozen jobs. My transition from being a senior captain in a Ranger battalion, top secret clearance, right? Most of the guys that I served with there retired as general officers, to I'm having trouble holding down a job and I can't pull a marriage together. That whole time period was horrible. And the VA is not a veteran's friend. So all of these experiences I've had, now I'm thrust back into the middle of these men who now have almost 2 years of constantly going back to the Ranger battalions, go in and out and out. And so as I talked to them, they weren't seeing any counselors. They were drinking, they were getting divorces. They weren't reporting their injuries. I had an artificial right hip, had that replaced about 12, 13 years ago. And the VA says, it didn't have anything to do with all the time she jumped out of airplanes in the middle of the night and carried her comics. But I never went to the medics and said, my hip bothers me, because I wanted to keep out of airplanes and doing Ranger stuff. So these guys are doing the same thing. So I'm thinking we've got to establish a network to help them as they leave the military, because they are making such a sacrifice. We need to do a better job of helping them come. So I started setting up a network of Army Rangers nationwide. And over the next 8 years, they moved to 1,000 Rangers strong. And these Rangers were all the way from old World War II guys to some that were on active duty. And I made a point of every year going back to Fort Benning, meeting with the commanding officer or the executive officer of the Ranger Regiment, and telling them, I'm here if you have Rangers that leave the military, especially if they're hurt, let me have them, because I will make sure they are connected and they are taken care of. That network became the basis of the nonprofit GallantFew in 2010. Through all of this, I realized that, especially on mental health, a young veteran is not going to talk to a counselor who has no idea what they did. They won't. They don't want to lay that trauma on somebody else. Right? That's the way they feel about it. They stop someone torn apart. They don't want to tell that counselor about it because it's going to hurt them. So they hold it in. Plus, they don't want to talk about it because they feel that they might fear that they're weak if they don't talk about it. So what I remembered was my uncle sat down and told me about traumatic things that happened to him, because now I was like, and so that became a tenet of what the organization became. Veterans, and we talk not in terms of age, but in terms of time out of the military. So we want a veteran that's been out of the military for a while to connect with a veteran leaving the military. So this veteran leaving the military might be 40, and the one that's been out for a while might be 30. The 30-year-old was a heck of a lot more about leaving the military than the 40-year-old, because they've done it, right? So we created this organization that now, after 14 years of connecting, coaching, and counseling, I went back to school pre-COVID when I was 58 years old. Went back to the University of North Texas to get my master's in counseling. And just last month, I became a fully licensed professional. So it's a very, very long process. But now my mission and what I use this organization to do is find men and women that have not left the military yet. And number one, tell them, go get counseling, right? You pull a leg muscle or a shoulder muscle, you go to a physical therapist. If you're experiencing anything going on with the brain, go see a brain specialist, right? Go see a therapist, go see somebody that understands traumatic brain injury or any kind of emotional conditions. Then we want to encourage them to think about becoming licensed mental health providers from the out. A veteran that enlists in the United States military from Texas and comes back to Texas afterwards gets not only the GI Bill, but also the Hazelwood. The Hazelwood Act doubles GI Bill. So they can go all the way through undergrad, all the way through master's, and probably part of the PhD program before they run out of education benefits. Phenomenal. What I see young men and women do is they get out and they take underwater master meeting because they need money to pay for a place to live. They have no idea what they want to do for a career. Now they burn that resource. They don't have a degree that's useful after 4 years. So it's encouraging them, number one, get mental health. Number two, be a mental health provider. And if you think that there's stigma getting mental health, what do you think they feel about when you ask them to think about being a mental health provider? Are you serious? Why would I want to do that? Well, if you like leading soldiers, what is leading soldiers? Leading soldiers is getting to know them emotionally, spiritually. It's helping them grow professionally. It's helping them control their social life. It's helping them become better versions of themselves. That's what counseling is. So if I can get more of them to do this, we're going to make a big difference in the future in the world of veterans. So it all started really back, and I need to update my slides so it reflects some of this, but it really all started with that spark. When Uncle Roy sat down with me, and that's when he decided to open up. That's when I understood the brotherhood isn't I mean, he and I, we had the same birthday. We were all the same family things together. This never happened until I became a veteran. So now there's a trust and a bond that transcends generations. And it's very, very, very powerful.
Carl,
I know we're coming up on the time.
well, if you don't mind pausing just a moment and let us do the four-way test and adjourn, and then that, because some people like to return to work, and that way the
I do
message can stay. Well, let's do that right quick, and then.
Yeah, I'll take any questions.
All right, Heights,
All right. Before we finish the application, the king said, do number one. Number two. Three.
meeting is adjourned, and then I'll turn it back over to, Carl.
Anybody have any questions?
What is kitchen?
Kitchen patrol.
Kitchen what?
Kitchen patrol. That means you're washing dishes, peeling potatoes.
Oh, my
It's always been,
goodness.
I'm not in the service. I've never been in the service, it's always been in movies like that. That's a function. Is that true?
It's not something you want to do,
Okay.
but, depending on the unit, you probably rotate people through.
Is your organization, the GallantFew organization, is it limited to Army?
No, it's any branch, any era. I haven't helped anybody from the state force yet. Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah,
just curious about that, because I'm connected to quite a few nations as well.
yeah, as a matter of fact, one of my key volunteers is retired Navy 06 and Jerry hasty. And he just, Navy Knights are Dark Lockheed. He's one of my coaches, so I got him from the other.
Bill was a paratrooper for some reason.
Being a young master on the air scope.
Your contact information.
Yeah, I've got parts here.
Do y'all do any type of trips over there or anything like that?
We, as an organization, no. What we do here is, every summer for the last 2 years, we're doing it at the end of July. I take a group of veterans to Colorado. We camp out, check the park, right to the top 5 skating rink. And that's, we run it like a military mission. So they get their operations order, they get their time of departure, they get all the instructions they're gonna have. Their mission is to make the top 5 skating, and then during that time, everybody pairs up. They talk about anything that's going on in life. So it's really powerful.
Do you have other plans to go over there? Just
Well, yeah,
for yourself?
we've been in Normandy and we've been in France a couple of times. My wife she's a calendar, so she's Scottish, and my grandmother, well, Roy, is Leslie Jones. They're from the Cork area of Ireland, and I've never been to Ireland, so we'll probably go to that at some point. But yeah, we'll go back over there.
When I was riding the train from Paris to London, went by a ton of little bitty towns, and every one of them has a cemetery and a spot in the cemetery with white crosses. Are those American soldiers? I've always wondered.
I don't know.
Just always wondered if there's going to be a little cluster of white crosses and all the other people's homes were scattered throughout.
If they were like the issue, but I don't know. Most of the Americans that, from what I've seen, are very American.
Oh,
Like if you go to Normandy,
right,
it's beyond borders.
right. Two pictures.
And all of the problems are in perfect alignment.
Oh, yeah.
Not only like that, but also diagonal.
There is an organization, and I don't recall the name of it, but they lead guided tours to various battle sites. Normandy is one. Are you familiar with that?
Well, I know of several of them, but I've not used one. When we went to Normandy, the Liberty Jump Team I've heard them, they do historical parachute reenactments, and they're based out of Roanoke. And so I became friends with the gal who runs that. She's married to a Frenchman who served in the 80s in the French Special Forces. And he was there, so when we went to Normandy, he lives in Normandy, so he was like, and I've got pictures, I have another presentation on Normandy. He lives in a 1600 era, it looks like a colonial style house like here. And the stairway goes up to the second floor. There's one part of the handrail and one of the boards are charred. And they never repaired that because during D-Day, General Gavin used that house for his command post for about an hour. He staff got in there, looked at their maps, and then they left. And after they left, the Germans shelled the house. And the woman that lived in the house was at the top of the stairs. And it killed her at the top of the stairs. So they left the burn marks at the top of the stairs. And that's his house. Pretty good.
This is fascinating. Thank you for sharing your,
Appreciate being asked to come talk.
yeah, my father-in-law, he was in the South Pacific War II, and he never would talk about it until it was on a website that was dedicated to the period that he was on. And then they have, I think, 12 migrants of pictures and stories from his time in the service. He actually found a picture of himself on the internet at 18 years old.
Nice. No,
This guy.
Oh,
I just go on.
Thank you for doing what you did.
that's it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, and so there's one thing. I'm glad you said that, but actually, I think that was my next slide. I'm not going to. Thank you for your service. So, one of my very good friends is a Ranger veteran who was an intelligence analyst. And his job was to go to the colonel and say, sir, the bad guys are in that building right there. That's the one we need to. And so he told 100% certainty that's the target. And he went along on target to identify bad guys. And the Ranger company goes in there, they call the men out of the house, and resist, they kill all of them. 5 dead guys. And now my friend Tim has to, and I apologize, it's a little graphic, he has to hold their faces together so he can take a picture so he can identify who they are. And then he has to go into the house where there's screaming wives and kids, and he has to go, what's his name? And he's showing the kids the photos of their dads. He finds out after about 15 minutes, they hit the bad hill, they weren't bad guys. So they had killed five terrorists. And he said for 30 minutes, he was on. And when he left the military, he went on a very, very downhill slope where tried to commit suicide. And he was able to come out of that. He got introduced to some psychiatric things that helped him, and now he's a licensed counselor in Denver. And he specializes in the microdosing type therapist. And he and I did a presentation to the American Counseling Association 2 weeks ago in New Orleans on moral injury, because that is a moral injury, right? He says he doesn't have PTSD, but all the counselors and psychiatrists try to push him into the PTSD box. So with Tim, when we think about what he went through, especially as a counselor, veteran like that comes in my office, I find out in the military, I say thank you for your service. What I'd like to thank you. Right? That can be not meaning to, but that can be hurtful. So what I like to say is thank you for my freedom. Because if you thank the veteran for your freedom, whatever they did was because of your.
Agree for that. You have been amazing. But I had really, so I don't know if anybody asked you that or not, but what ultimately happened to the loss of that? Were they?
Well, after about 3 weeks, the Major Willoughby led the remainder out. I think and my numbers are gonna be wrong, but I think 600 went in, and only about 120 were able to walk out of their own power, and all of them were moved inside. There wasn't any of them. There was a movie, I don't remember the name of the guy, the blonde-haired actor that was known for doing kid TV shows. Ricky something, I can't remember his last name. Ricky Schroeder starred as Mick Whittlesby in the Lost of Time movie 30 years ago. And it's really pretty good. It tells the story pretty good.
Well, did they hold their position? Was it successful?
Yeah.
Okay.
They were never, but where that slope was, at the top there, where I, the picture of me standing at the monument, the Germans were standing there shooting down.
Oh, God.
So it was
It's amazing anybody could shoot a barrel.
very amazing, very amazing. And so,
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation.
yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it.